through those with you now very briefly. One is intercultural programs that connect UTA's diverse populations, as I just mentioned. The second is welcome and ongoing support for international students. Not only do we have the sixth most ethnically diverse undergraduate population in the United States, but we have international students from more than 100 different countries. So we help them adjust to the United States and succeed academically, professionally, and socially as well. Global education opportunities. So we do things like International Education Week, International Week in the spring, and just lots of other things in collaboration with different departments and student organizations and academic classes to promote global education opportunities on campus. And finally, intercultural training and assessment. So you're getting a little taste of that today, but we definitely do more extensive trainings. And this one's just going to kind of give you a general idea for anybody who's interested in studying abroad, or if you're an international student and you're curious about learning more about the United States, we think this is going to be very helpful for you as well. Okay, so we're going to focus on three main things, and that is the importance of intercultural competency in our world today, understanding cultural differences, there's a fun activity there, and developing intercultural skills. Big topic, so we look forward to hearing some of your ideas there, but let's get started with a really important question. What is culture? We could probably spend a semester talking about the answer to this question. I'm just going to present one definition that we can work with together today. Culture affects nearly every aspect of our lives. Culture explains our shared values, behaviors, beliefs, the languages that we speak, communication styles, and living practices of a given society. It is really a beneficial thing to try and learn this information about your own culture and develop that self-awareness, and also try to learn that about other cultures as well. It's something you can really achieve a tremendous amount of growth by taking the time to really try and understand how this influences your life. On a similar note, it's also really important to define what culture isn't. I think it's a good starting place just to think about that other cultures are not good or bad. They're not right or wrong. They're not better or worse than yours. Oftentimes when we're first starting to think about different cultures, this is a starting place for a lot of people, just kind of comparing things. But it's good to know like what is different or confusing or strange to you about another culture might be perfectly normal to them because that's their way of life, and vice versa. So we want to view differences not from this perspective of comparison, because that automatically kind of creates walls for understanding and barriers. And it's tough to go beyond that and develop curiosity and ask a lot of questions and really form meaningful connections and understanding. So we're going to approach this conversation together today from this point of being very open-minded and curious and trying to learn as much as possible. In my personal experience, and I'm sure a lot of others who have studied abroad, if you possess that mentality going into it, you become that much more immersed and really, really develop meaningful experiences and overcome culture shock and things like that. So I want to hear from everybody kind of off the start to get you engaged in thinking about this question. So I would welcome you to unmute your microphone and just kind of answer this question. How would you describe your culture? So maybe you can talk about where you're from and then some ideas about how would you describe your culture. So if somebody could, please unmute and just share some ideas, that would be wonderful.
Lauren has her hand up. Go ahead, Lauren. There you go.
Okay. So I guess my culture is that I am Vietnamese, and like it's a mixture of both American culture and being Vietnamese. So it's not like I eat the same kind of foods every day, and at home I speak Vietnamese more than English.
Excellent. Thank you, Lauren. I think I'll stop here, just kind of talk about this for a little bit before we move on. And this is, I think, a really good example, too, when thinking about culture, because a lot of people, especially in the United States, identify as bicultural or multicultural. And that's really important to understand about our country as well. That they, have different identities that influence them and, how they communicate with maybe their friends here and their family members and things like that. So that's a really important consideration as well. We're going to talk a little bit about U.S. cultural values and how they might compare to other countries around the world. But this is a big, big question that I think it's super important to reflect on. Why? Because if this is a challenge to answer, I empathize with you. I think, when I was younger and the first time I studied abroad or when I moved to China, I probably would have had a challenging time articulating a lot of my own cultural values. And that's important to consider because it is really difficult to meaningfully understand or adapt to a new place if you don't have that level of self-awareness of your own values and how they influence other people. So really important to develop that self-awareness before you try and go to a different country, so you can really reflect on your actions and your thoughts and your behaviors and interactions and so forth, and you understand how that might influence people who don't share those values with you. All right, so a definition of intercultural competency, what we're talking about together today. This is a standard definition that was brought forth by Darla Deerdorf, and that is the knowledge, attitudes, and behaviors that lead to effective and appropriate interactions with people from different cultural backgrounds. So let's pick apart that definition a little bit. Knowledge, the knowledge you possess of your own culture and others, attitudes, and behaviors. So these three things leading to appropriate interactions with people from different cultural backgrounds, effective and appropriate. A key takeaway from this is it's really important to understand, the interactions that you're having with other people. They should be deemed and considered appropriate by people from that culture. I think it's really easy sometimes if you haven't, really developed a lot of understanding about a different culture that you're living in, to think that I'm doing everything correctly. I'm trying my best not to make mistakes and be respectful. And that's great. That's where your attitude comes into play and behaviors and things like that. But without knowledge in this case, you might actually be doing something that would be considered culturally inappropriate, and you could be unaware of that. And that's where a lot of this misunderstanding and miscommunication comes from. So it is important to know that your actions and behaviors are being perceived as appropriate by members of that culture. All right, what are some intercultural skills? There's a big list of them. We're not going to spend a lot of time on that, but I do think it's important just to take a look at all the wonderful things that you get by developing intercultural skills. So being open-minded, being non-judgmental, I think is extremely important, right? Accepting of differences. That's also, a really great thing to develop. I think we are kind of living in an age where people have very strong opinions, and in a lot of cases we're polarized. And you can accept a difference without agreeing with it. I think that's really important to understand, that you don't always have to agree that a different behavior is correct or what you would like to follow, but you can accept it as a different way of living and different way of experiencing life. And that's a great thing to think about. Adaptability to new environments. That's something that study abroad and living in a different culture gives you in abundance. And that's such a valuable life skill. I mean, think about everything we're trying to do to get used to our lives during COVID right now. We've all had to be very adaptable. And, that's something that comes a little bit easier if you've lived in a different environment and had to adjust to things. Empathy, the ability to put yourself in somebody else's shoes, obviously is really important. Self-awareness, positive regard for others. We'll talk about this in the context of the IES. Being curious, strong communication skills, language skills, knowing indirect and direct communication, and so forth. And global perspective and understanding different views. So those are some intercultural skills. A point that I want to make about this, though, is aren't all of these qualities equally important for understanding people who might be from different races or ethnicities, religions, gender, sexual orientations, and so on? So really any kind of difference, you'll be better served if you have developed these skills. And like I said, you just think about how divided, the United States is and the world is in so many different issues, because we're all kind of obsessed with trying to prove that our view is right. And we're not really connecting with each other and learning from each other and things like that. So all of these skills will really help you in life if you take the time to develop them, especially, if you are thinking about going abroad. All right, so as I mentioned, no matter what you do in the future, what you're studying now, where you want to work, you are going to be with people from different backgrounds, and you're going to need those intercultural skills. The next thing I'm going to talk about will help you kind of frame where you might be at, or people you know, family and friends and things like that, in terms of your current cultural development. So what we're looking at here is the intercultural development continuum. I'm going to talk about this briefly, but it does help many people kind of situate where they might be in life in terms of cultural understanding. So we're going to look at each of these stages, and what we're kind of doing is starting from a monocultural mindset where you really experience life through the perspective of one culture, your own, and you probably haven't had a chance to meet people from different cultures. And trying to move through different stages so we get closer to an intercultural mindset where you're really seeing cultures as similar and different to each other and in relation to each other. So these stages are starting with denial. And there are billions of people, who might identify with this stage. It doesn't mean they're bad people. It's certainly not a negative thing. I was this way, for probably the first 20 years of my life because I'm from a small town in the Midwest that really didn't have differences to speak of. Certainly not racial or ethnic difference. We might have had an exchange student, I think, but that was about it. So people in denial might be unaware that differences exist, and they are often isolated. And if you think about all the small towns throughout the United States and around the world and things like that, where they haven't had that exposure, again, it's through no fault of their own, but it's tough to really have that understanding of difference when you're not exposed to it at all. So that's kind of what it means to be in this area of denial. You may identify with this, at some point in your life, or you may not. People start in different stages and they might not experience all of these either, but this just kind of captures where a lot of people are at in life. Polarization is the next level here. And this is an ethnocentric way of kind of living and experiencing the world. Ethnocentrism essentially means that you view your culture as the correct one, in some cases, the superior one. Your values are the right ones. So it is kind of an us versus them mentality. It's where you're informed by a lot of stereotypes and maybe kind of superficial understanding about differences and things like that. I always think of like colonialism and is an example of this when people justified their culture being and civilization being superior as their right to conquer other places. But we see it certainly today all over the world too, ethnocentrism. So that's when you are aware that differences exist, but you're kind of judging your own culture as the right one. Minimization is thinking that everybody is more or less the same. So this is more positive because you are moving towards an intercultural mindset, and you probably are exposed to a lot of differences, and that's good because you're not in that place where you're in denial or you're ethnocentric or anything like that. But one of the challenges is this is often the hardest stage to move from as well, because you might be surrounded by difference, but you've never really developed that understanding of your own values or how they might be similar or different to other people. So you're kind of content with that and you stick there. But that's not really understanding how significant cultural differences are in this world and how it really does influence everything about our lives. So if you go overseas and you've thought everybody is more or less the same and you start to experience these really significant differences in values, that's where culture shock comes into play and maybe some isolation and loneliness because you don't understand what's going on. So we do want to try and go beyond that, moving towards acceptance that you understand cultural differences exist and you're trying to learn about those values and perspectives. So really trying to absorb that knowledge. And that's a wonderful, wonderful thing. It will help you understand the world so much better. And it's like a key to unlocking a lot of things that might seem confusing in the world. And hopefully, as you progress, in life and you really try to develop these skills, you might move more towards adaptation where you're able to see the world through another person's eyes and you can adapt your behavior and communication across differences. This takes a long time. Intercultural skills are a lifelong endeavor. Certainly, I've been trying to develop them my whole life. I'm probably at this stage right now, but it's been a journey. It didn't happen the first time I lived overseas. It took a lot of struggle. It took a lot of self-reflection and learning, but it's a wonderful thing because it's just really helped me understand the world and really bring down a lot of the negativity and stereotypes that I thought might kind of characterize different countries and places, and just help me see, all the goodness that exists because I've overcome so much in terms of what I thought might be the case by actually connecting with people. All right, we're going to move on to part 2, understanding cultural differences, and I think that's going to take us into a breakout discussion. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn it back over to Ryan at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to give you a chance to kind of unpack some of those things Adam just said, as well as a discussion about cultural values here in a moment. I'm going to send a meeting invite to half of you attendees, and you'll join that meeting, and Colleen will help lead that discussion. We'll just be there for about 7, maybe 10 minutes, and then we'll come back to this meeting here. So half of you will stay here with me. The other half will receive a meeting invitation from me right now, and then you can join that meeting, and then we'll meet back here to continue with the presentation. I'm going to stop recording now since this will be a discussion activity.